One damn thing at a time. Fuck it. You're supposed to. Hey, Tanisha.
Hey, Christian, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
All right.
Okay, good. Looks like we ain't had no questions to earlier, so I was like, cool,
Yeah, that was great.
cool. No questions. Keep it moving.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I don't. Well, let's see what we got on here. This shouldn't be that long. Well, never mind. Oh, hold on. This is Darrell.
Hi there.
Hi, Louise.
How are we
How
all?
are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing okay, thank you.
Okay, it sounds good.
Yeah. Did you have a good weekend and a good
Yes,
holiday? Good.
yes. Except for
Good.
trying to keep up with stuff that wasn't working, but otherwise it was fine.
Right. Absolutely. The
Everybody
story
thinks
of my
they're
life.
focused. Somebody said to me, "Well, I've been reading that there's a nursing shortage in the paper, but can't you do something about it?" And I'm like, "No."
Look, what do you want me to create a nurse?
Would you like to go to nursing school?
Right, absolutely. Do you want to go to nursing school? Exactly.
Or the other one is, well, I know there's this nursing shortage, but why does it have to apply to my school?
Wow. That's funny.
Yeah, except when you're the one who's hearing it.
Right, except when you're exactly. I get it. I get it. That's amazing. You have to, Louise, a magic wand.
Magic wand, right. I grow tulips in one yard and nurses in the other.
Right, right. That's good.
You realize how many years ago you were my secretary? It's a long, long time.
Yeah, it has been a long time. My son is 23 now.
Wow. And I remember when he was born.
Right.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
You going to wave away the frost from tonight?
Would you say?
Are you going to wave away the frost from tonight?
Oh, where I'm at, it's cool, but it's no frost. I'm on the West Coast at the moment, so doing work out here. So I
Um,
got a little bit of a nor'easter.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Brooks,
Yes,
did you go to Southern High School?
yes, I did.
Dr. Brooks, I believe I was your PE teacher in 10th grade.
Oh my goodness.
Yup, it's.
Now do you remember?
Oh my God, that is so
Mhm.
weird. It's so great to see you.
You too. I've seen your name on the school board list for a couple of years now, and I said there can be only one.
There
You know?
actually is only one. That is so random. It is so good to see you. And I know I was a terrible PE student. I'm so sorry.
No, no, I think you've managed to do okay for yourself.
I know I used to be like, well, I'm not playing that sport. So let me go sit over here in the corner. And be like, nah, let's come on.
No, I mean the students I remember from Southern were all pretty good. So the
Yeah.
students who may have had some behavior issues, I may have forgotten some of their names by now. So
Well, this is a wonderful reunion. I now
Mhm.
got to tell all of my folks who were in my grade band at that point, like Jackie and Kelly and all the folks I used to hang out. We were
Mhm.
probably all in the same class together. That's so bizarre.
It's crazy, right?
They're still around, which is awesome.
I am. This is my 24th school year.
Oh, wow. Congratulations and thank you.
Thanks, sir. It's nice to see how you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm doing okay. Hi,
Yes.
Commissioner McFadden. It's so good to see you. And is Ezra joining us as well?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my mouse isn't working. I'm trying to unclick, but good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Dr. Brooks, I haven't heard from Ezra, so I assume they're coming.
Okay. Right, and I think just to note for probably the next policy chair, whoever that might be, like if we keep our student commissioner on, they're ending school around this time, so it actually takes some time for them to actually get to the meeting. So we probably should move the time moving the next round. So I'm going to just go ahead and get us started. So first, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining our meeting today. And let me pull up my little notes so I can do my rap sheet. My computer's a little slow today. So today we're gonna, so I call this meeting to order April 19th, 2022. Today we'll be covering two policies. We'll have discussions on policy and regulation revisions and in response to MSDE's model policy on supporting pregnant and parenting students. And then we'll also hear about policy Ihbj on public charter schools. And we also have two compliance reports that we'll have some conversation about around access to appropriate physical education, as well as promotion and retention in our K through 12 space. Just a reminder to our presenters, if you could take no more than 20 minutes to sort of give your presentation, that would allow us to have more robust time for discussion. And let me just check to see if we have any signups. So I'm not missing anybody. Doesn't look like we have any public comment folks as well. So I'm going to pass it over to our folks who are going to be talking us through the MSDE model policy, and I will yield. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much for
Chief
taking
Sivan, I think I saw Chief Sivan talking, but you're still muted.
I'll let Chief Sivan go.
Sure. So you've already met Rebecca Burney, assistant counsel on our team, and so she and Louise Fink are going to lead off this presentation along with Jane Ehrenfeld, our director of fair practices, and Sarah Warren, our executive director for wholeness. And that's my role here. I get to turn off my screen and leave it to this great team to present.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Our Chief Sivan.
He's also controlling our PowerPoint, so he's doing a lot of great work in the background. So just to kick things off, so as you mentioned, the reason that we are proposing all of these policy revisions is due to MSDE's model policy to support pregnant and parenting students. And you should have received a summary document of all of the changes that we're recommending to each individual policy. So it might be easiest if you want to reference that as we're going through all of these changes. So just wanted to flag that. It was, I believe, submitted last week. Okay, so MSDE's model policy, new state law took effect on July 1st of 2021, and it required local school systems to add supports to their current policy for pregnant and parenting teens. And so based on the MSDE model policy, each local school system must update and publish their policies to reflect the changes by June 1st, 2022. So as you know, that's quickly approaching, which is why we're also going to be asking to waive second reader when we go to first reader. And the model policy that was developed by MSDE was based on a lot of research, best practices, recommendations and protocols from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. And again, they instructed each local school system to provide evidence of their model policy training and also include that information in a handbook to be provided to all students by June 1st. Next slide. Okay, great. So the changes that we're recommending and really the model policy as a whole aligns with all of the board's strategic priorities. We highlighted the ones we thought were most relevant, but again, this is really about creating an atmosphere where pregnant and parenting students are supported in every way, from community supports to support in the classroom, support with extracurriculars, making sure that staff that are interacting with pregnant and parenting students also have the tools to provide the supports that they need. Next slide. So a quick overview of our schedule. So on May 24th, we're going to first reader. As I mentioned, we'll be asking the board to waive second reader for the technical changes that we're recommending to policies ACH, JEA, and JBB. And this is really so that we can meet the MSDE deadline, which is also required by state law. And so most of the work that we'll be doing is really aligning MSDE's model policy with our current board policy. So there's a lot of cross-referencing and consolidating and bringing everything into one place. And so before we start talking about all the technical revisions, we wanted to turn it over to our amazing colleagues in student wholeness to talk about the work that we're already doing to support pregnant and parenting students.
So good afternoon, everyone. At this particular point, the Home and Hospital Office is working with our pregnant and parenting teens through Home and Hospital and our program. We provide services to young women from the time they get us know that they're pregnant, but we start services in terms of Home and Hospital services the 2 weeks before delivery, and we continue services until 6 weeks after delivery. We provide in-home services, but we also provide social work services that gives them access to all kinds of programs that are available to them to help them work out all the details of what they're going to need to make their lives comfortable. We also, in several of our schools, have mom and dad school clubs where the mom and dad's clubs permit students to get together, share ideas, and share things together. So we provide a lot of services, and as all of our services, we come to pregnant and parenting teams, so we refer them to the different programs that are available through the Baltimore City Health Department and the services that are available to help with their babies and with the other kind of programs that are available to make things work out for them in a better way. Next slide. I want to tell you a little bit about our current snapshot. We have 47 referrals as of March 30th, 2022. And 100% of our pregnant and parenting 12th grade students are on track to graduate this year, which were 17 of them, and we're very proud of them. They've done an amazing amount of work to have their babies get back into school and are graduating. 15 out of 18 students returned to school after being on home teaching on March 1st, 2022. Other students are still with us, and some of us will be with us for the rest of the year. We had a 12th grade student who received 504 services, and she's on track to graduate and has participated with the home teaching program. We have a 12th grade student who just had her second child, and she lives on her own. She comes to her mother's house for teaching, and she's on track to graduate. We're very proud of her. And next slide, please. And we have a young lady who is a senior. She's a very highly motivated senior. She worked very, very hard, and she not only is graduating, she got a scholarship, a full scholarship to one college, and she got a half scholarship to another college, and she will be continuing her education after she leaves us in June. So we're very proud of her, and we're very proud of the home and hospital teachers and social workers who made this possible for her.
All right, so we want to walk through now the objectives that we've kind of thought through in updating the existing policies and then adding this new regulation. And so really what we're trying to do here is centralize information and make it easily accessible. We already have a lot of work that's been done, both what Dr. Fink just said and also the important work the board has already done to ensure that pregnant and parenting students have access to services through our existing policies. And so what we're trying to do with this new regulation, which will be JBBRB, is to provide a roadmap for how to find the information that already exists in our policies across city schools. Next slide. So what we're going to do is we're really going to try to streamline and enhance the protocols while staying in keeping with what MSDE has put out. We're going to make sure that these protocols are accessible to students and families. We're going to make sure that it's clear who's responsible for which parts of the support for pregnant and parenting students, and then ensure that staff are getting training on supporting pregnant and parenting students. Next slide. So the policies that already exist that touch on pregnant and parenting student related issues are JEA, which is the compulsory attendance policy, and JEARA, the regulation, And those actually currently cover pregnant and parenting students and what happens if a student needs to be absent because they're pregnant or parenting. We are going to be just adding to that a little bit in line with what MSDE requires, and also adding a reference to it in the new regulation. We have ACH, which is nursing parents. And right now the policy and the related regulation cover both students and employees. And we're trying to make sure that that gets a little clearer, because the regulations from MSDE are a little different than what we have for nursing parents who are employees. And so we want to make sure that it's clear in the new regulation what applies to pregnant and parenting students, and then carve out ACH as relating to employees. Next slide. And then we have JBA and JBARA and JBBRA, and then JICK and JICKRA, all of which relate to discrimination and harassment. And so if a student is either not receiving the services they need as a pregnant and parenting student, or they are being harassed on the basis of being a pregnant or parenting student, they have a lot of resources already in our existing policies and regulations to address that discrimination or that harassment, including lack of access to, for example, lactation time or lactation facilities. But we wanted to house the new regulation within JBB as sex-based discrimination, because we felt like that's where it fit best within the kind of whole world of our existing policies.
Great, thank you. So our second objective was to cross-reference requirements in MSD's model policy with areas that are already addressed by our existing board policies. And so one of the requirements by MSDE was that it's clear that city schools prohibit gender discrimination of any type in educational programs and activities, including bias against pregnant parenting students. And Jane already mentioned the policies we currently have in JBB. And so what we did in our draft regulation is really expand on this policy by including guidance from the Office of Civil Rights. And so just making it clearer and more explicit that, for example, if a doctor's note is not required for a non-pregnant student to participate in an activity, then that cannot be required of a pregnant or parenting student either. And so really just providing more specific examples and guidance around the rights that pregnant and parenting students have. The second piece, pregnant and parenting students must be allowed to participate in all aspects of their educational program. Again, this was partially addressed in policy JEA, and we just cross-referenced and expanded. The second piece that was required by MSDE is that we include a definition of parenting student. And so we added this definition to policies ACH and JBB, and those are cross-referenced in the new regulation as well. Next slide. Another requirement of MSD's model policy was limitation of liability regarding construction of an additional space in order to provide students with a private lactation space. And again, this was partially addressed in policy ACH. So it's cross-referenced and then just made a little bit more explicit that schools are not required to construct a new space. They should be finding a private lactation space in the building they already have. In terms of procedures, again, MSDE requires attendance and lawful absences policies, makeup work, lactation. Almost all of these things were already addressed in our current policies as Jane laid out. And so we really just did a lot of cross-referencing. Again, protections against bullying and harassment, we cross-referenced policies JICK and regulation JICKRA. So there was not a lot of added information there.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. So a few more required elements of the MSDE model policy, which were kind of partially addressed in existing policies and regulations, but which we need to add to and enhance. One is around support for students. And so currently, so the model policy requires that there be some sort of staff member designated. And so we really thought, school social workers and the pupil personnel workers or the best folks, and I believe we're going to tag the social workers as the people who are gonna be responsible for coordinating at the school level for students who need that work, and then working with the Office of Transportation also to ensure that students have their transportation needs met. And so that's already partially addressed in ACH and JEA, but we're going to make sure that we're cross-referencing and then expanding to really clarify who's responsible for providing these services and for connecting students to community resources. As you saw, Dr. Fink is doing this work already on the ground, but just making sure that every school understands that they have to have a staff member designated. On the training front, that's already partially addressed again in policy JBB and ACH, but we're going to ensure that staff are fully trained, including on the new obligations under the model policy. And then finally, making sure that the policy information is clearly disseminated on a yearly basis to schools and to students.
Great. So the final piece of this was to make technical edits to existing policies and regulations. So this is where the summary document may come in handy just to make it a little bit easier to follow along. There were a number of small technical revisions we had to make, mostly to cross-reference JBB RB, but again, there were other small revisions that were required under the law. So for JEA, we just cross-referenced JBB RB and made small technical revisions. JEA RA, again, cross-referenced the new regulation as well as ACH RA, just to highlight excused absences for use of a lactation space. That was something that wasn't really highlighted in JEA RA. For ACH, again, we cross-referenced JBB and we included that definition of parenting student as required by MSDE. ACH RA had probably the longest list of revisions in which we cross-referenced the new regulation and JEA in order to streamline and make sure that there was no duplication in our new regulation. And we also made it clear that city schools will provide nursing students and employees actually with access to a refrigerator for storage of express milk. So our current policy said that students were required to provide their own storage and refrigeration. And that was under MSDE's model policy. We could not require students to do that. And we also thought it would be unfair to require that of employees as well. JBB, again, we just included that definition of parenting student and additional language about supporting pregnant and parenting students in order to align with the proposed new regulation. And for JBB RA, again, we just referenced JBB RB as a related regulation.
All right, and then finally, we just want to talk for a minute about stakeholder engagement. We are certainly vetting these revisions with internal city schools office stakeholders. And then because most of these revisions are technical in nature and they're required under the new model policy, we want to reach out to external organizations, and we intend to, but the way that we're intending to do that is to send them the proposed revisions and the proposed model regulation, new regulation, and ask them for written feedback with the option of scheduling a follow-up meeting if they would like. But because these are really very technical changes, and because City Schools already has done most of the board has done most of the heavy lifting on ensuring that pregnant and parenting students have very strong protections under existing policies, we are anticipating that stakeholders will receive this and kind of see that we're mostly just refining and streamlining what already exists in our policies. That's all we have.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation. And so I'm going to invite some of my colleagues, if you had any questions that they'd like to offer.
Thank you. I don't have any questions right now at the moment. It's pretty straightforward with the law and the updates that we had to make. So I don't have any questions at the moment. Thank you, Commissioner Brooks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you to the team.
Yeah, and so I just had a couple of thoughts and would love to hear your feedback. And so I'm interested in hearing a little bit about how you will sort of the ways in which equity sort of plays into sort of what you have outlined, and to really think about sort of specifically sort of my work around sort of insistence on sort of like how do we begin to name sort of our students who are part of the queer umbrella, if you will, and how their experience with pregnancy, and particularly at this age, looks different. And so I'm curious if you all have think about like sort of the process that you laid out, how that might look different if we're supporting a young lesbian teenager, for example, or a trans student who might also be pregnant. So I would love to just hear any thoughts or feedback there.
Yeah, I think I can jump in, and Rebecca, feel free to add. One of the major considerations here is being very intentional with our language. And so we've completely moved away from words like mother and father. And so we talk about pregnant students, parenting students, birthing parent, birthing student, or nursing student or lactating student, and moving away from identifying those individuals by gender, as traditionally was the case. And so that's really, really important for us. It's also really important for us to think about kind of looking at the role rather than the gender of the student and not making assumptions. And we've had a lot of really robust conversations about how to ensure that fathers, whether they be transgender, whether they be cisgender students, understand that they're included in this policy as parenting students, and that may be something that they need to access if they're actively parenting. So those are two of the kind of the main ways. And then in housing this under policy JBB, which, as you know, contains all of our protections for LGBTQ plus students, I think that is drawing a strong parallel for our students between what we're saying here about pregnancy and parenting and the connection back to that policy. But I'll also let my colleagues jump in with other thoughts.
Good afternoon, commissioners. I just wanted to add a little bit. I think that, as with every policy, there's what we write, and then there's how we realize it on the ground and in our schools. So in this case, I think specific to your question, one of the really important things will be how we go about training people and supporting them and actually implementing this. And the key message, I think, that we have to make sure is coming through and that we're helping people with is making sure that this is applied across the board, and that anyone can access this, that we're not being narrow in our thinking about who might actually need these supports. So I do think that comes into how we take the policy down and operationalize it and train and support folks.
Great, thank you. And also, so I think sort of naming sort of, again, as you mentioned, who like that this is for folks who might be experiencing this, and I'm also curious about, we know that there are already initiatives happening in the district to actually sort of continue to increase LGBT awareness and visibility. And how are we sort of like tying this into like other sort of training opportunities to be able to, for example, if we're doing a training on LGBT issues, to recognize that also sometimes those are young people who are a part of our community who also experiencing sort of birth and pregnancy. And so I'm curious about that, and I think that is some of the implementation of that. So I think that's really, really great. But also I think really sort of at a more specific level, I'm thinking more about the service provision. And I'm curious, sort of thinking about do we have access to appropriate services if a young person who were a part of our community actually sort of said they needed they wanted to take advantage of this service, these supports, do we have people to get them connected to the right organizations or the right people in communities to actually support them in that way? I'm just curious, and if not, then hopefully we can find.
No, it's a really great point, and Dr. Fink may want to weigh in here. I mean, I think that as with a lot of student support services, it comes down to a combination of making sure that the folks who are going to be doing this work and really leading the support of students at the school level are equipped with a clear, list and a set of resources that they know they can turn to in order to connect students. But then it's also making sure that our team at the central level, and in this case in Dr. Fink's office, also have that ability. And sometimes it's sort of a toggling back and forth between the district and the school supports, because in individual cases, students go to different people, or sometimes land at our level at the district office looking for that kind of help. So I think we kind of need to blanket everybody in all aspects, all offices and schools. And admittedly, I think if we're being humble, Dr. Brooks, we probably have a little bit more work to do to make sure that we do have that resource library, well in place, and would love your support with that too. Dr. Fink, what else would you add to that?
I would add that we partner with the Baltimore City Health Department in offering services, and the services are constructed to do the best thing for the parenting people involved and for the children. So we want to always be able to reach out and make sure that the children get what they need, that the parenting student gets the kind of childcare help they need, and anybody who is referred to our office always will get help. That's one of the ways that we try to work it. In terms of how this is going to work with the policy, we happen to have been gifted by the district with 2 amazing social workers who do a great job of training, and who are people who are totally involved in equity and making sure that everything is done in that type of fashion. And we would offer them as part of a leadership role in terms of training after we pass this legislation for the district, and this policy is for the training for the fall. So that would be one of the elements that would be there as part of a training package.
Wonderful. So thank you for that. Are you a chief, Sarah? Warren? I'm trying to figure out, is it executive? Like, am I supposed to? I'm struggling. I don't want to be like, hey, Sarah. But
Executive Director, yeah.
Executive Director Warren. So I also definitely would be interested in supporting in terms of like what services and connections. So one of the things that came up as I was looking at the policy was thinking about that our community engagement. So I saw the list of potentials. I wonder if we could also include maybe some LGBT folks on that. So like Advocates for Youth, who isn't necessarily an LGBT organization, but we have the 3 R's curriculum that's already a part of that, and they already do comprehensive sexuality education. They might have some feedback there. And then also was thinking about, let's see, what other note did I have here? And then also thinking about Healthy Teen Network, which is right down the street from central office, who also does a lot of sexual and reproductive health work. And I think over the last many years, I've partnered with them to do some more LGBT work. And so I think they could bring a lens there. So I think they might be some really cool partners to sort of bring in if we haven't already sort of tapped them in the space.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I had one other thing on. So I was looking at the timeline around sort of like the 10-day window, and I was wondering if it was the same time that was allocated for like I don't know if you call it a sort of a canal birth versus a cesarean, and so I was wondering if that 10-day recommendation was the same, or how might that look different based on sort of what's happening.
It's always individualized, whatever the student needs. This is our basic premise. And then there are things that we do that will go above and beyond. We're not going to send a student back after 6 weeks who has 4 weeks to graduation, or we're not going to send somebody back who has a child who's ill, who needs extra help. This is just our basic plan. We do a lot of going the extra mile for these young people because it's hard to do. It's hard to have a child and hard to be responsible for parenting and be responsible for getting your schoolwork done. So we work very hard to make sure that they're connected with all the correct resources. And then, well, this is one of the other things we have here. Our office also manages the homeless program, and we have an LBGT coordinator who's part of that homeless program that we hired this year, and they are also available to help in any situation where it would be appropriate for one of our parenting teams.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for that. And I was just wondering, so then maybe in like, is there a way to signal in our policy that it's like more flexible then around that particular time window? If it's, if we say it's 10, it looks like it's just a flat 10, but what I'm hearing is variability based on the need.
The policy has the variability, but the first thing that they end up doing is meeting with the social worker, and that's the first thing they tell them, that we're there to help you, we'll be with you for as long as you need, but we're staffed based on what this policy is. So it just gives us a basic thing here where for most of our students, that 9 weeks has made the difference between being a high school graduate or being a dropout. And if we need more, we'll put more in. We'll come to our wonderful friends at the board and say we need more staff.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, so that I think that for me was probably all that I had for this particular presentation. So thank you all so much. Oh,
excuse me, Dr. Brooks. Really, have we taken into consideration getting any feedback around this particular policy draft with students?
So we have talked about trying to share it with some of the students that have been served through this program, which I don't think that maybe they made it onto that slide, but that is certainly something that that we've talked about and I think need to do.
Yeah, I definitely think that will be helpful, not just to inform the policy, but to educate, our young people on the services and things that are provided to them. I think that would be beneficial for us. It's like we always talk about what is best and useful for young people, but I think it's always important to bring their voices in to inform the decisions that we're making for them. So just a thought. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Commissioner McFadden, because it jogged my memory. So I'm wondering what sort of the compliance looks like for this, because the testimonials that you have are really powerful, and I'm wondering if there are other ways that that report can sort of highlight who the students are, not at their granular level, but in the sense of accessing services and how they're moving through it. And I think getting the feedback from the students or the people who have participated in the services on what might sort of additional things that they might find that they might need that might not be in the model policy that goes beyond that. And given that we don't have to accept the model as the ceiling, but the floor, that there might be some other things that we might consider adding. And I do know we're also up against a timeline. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in the mix as well, but I think it could be potentially very fruitful to have a strong policy around that.
Yes, we totally agree. Anything we can do for our children or our young people is what we want to do. We want to make them have a good life, and we want to make their babies have a good life as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing this work continue to show up in support of our students who need it the most. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to our other presentation, which will be on sort of public charter schools.
Sorry, my computer froze when I was uploading it.
It's all good. Thank you, Angela, Chief Alvarez.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of New Initiatives, and I'm joined by Kim.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Coleman, specialist in the Office of New Initiatives, and we are presenting policy Ihbj and its accompanying regulation, the Public Charter Schools Policy.
And I just want to acknowledge Trevor Roberts on our staff, who also worked on this policy with us. He can't be here today, but I just wanted to acknowledge him on the record, as well as our Chief Legal Counsel, Josh Sivan. And we're going to go ahead and begin.
So the purpose statement of policy Ihbj is to provide parents and students an alternative means within the existing public school system for additional innovative learning opportunities and creative educational approaches to improve the education of students. While elements of the policy really do touch upon many of the board's strategic priorities, it's most directly aligned with priority 6, increasing the number of educational programming of all types and levels throughout the city, while ensuring that all schools, including charters, guarantee a high quality educational experience. The policy has been recently updated, and so there are no major changes we're proposing at this time, but we are proposing some minor technical revisions, including clarification around waiver rules and when schools receive automatic waivers. And this is partly to ensure alignment with other related policy updates, and also to fine tune pieces where the current language isn't precise and may leave room for interpretation. Nothing major. There are also some minor semantic updates in the description of our school-based lottery systems to ensure that the terminology aligns with Maryland charter law. And possibly the most substantive of the updates are in setting forth standards for our non-charter operator-led schools. These standards already exist in individual school contracts, and so the purpose in incorporating these school types in IHBJ is to provide clarity and requirements and expectations for each type of our operator-led schools in developing and implementing each of their programs. And lastly, there are some recommended updates to set forth clear criteria around the exemptions that contract schools have around unique enrollment criteria, and to define the conditions under which city schools would establish a contract school as a non-charter school. I know the purpose of this slide is to clarify the various types of operator-led schools that we have in the district, because you'll often hear folks lump all 3 in the same category of charter schools, but there are key distinctions between each of our different operator-led school types. So all of our operator-led schools include any public school that's operated by an outside entity, inclusive charter, contract, and transformation schools. So all of them serve Baltimore City public school students. They're operated by outside entities who manage the daily operations of the school. They have contracts with the board that spell out their requirements. They're public schools. They're subject to state and federal requirements of public schools, and they undergo frequent review in exchange for their increased autonomies. The majority of our operator-led schools, though, are charters. We have 32 charter schools in operation for school year 21-22. They're all governed by Maryland charter law. They have increased capacity to request waivers of state requirements, and those are subject to state approval. They're not automatic. They're granted autonomies in many areas of decision making. And the contract schools are really similar to charters in terms of their responsibilities, autonomies, and their funding formulas, but they typically have unique student admissions criteria necessary to implement their programming. These schools are usually established in very limited circumstances to meet a specific need of the district. So for example, to provide early college programming in high school. And there are 2 contract schools in operation in school year 21-22. That's Elmer A. Henderson, targeting specific geographic areas in East Baltimore, and Bard Early College High School offers programming where students can receive a high school diploma and an associate's degree upon graduation, and also transferable college credits upon graduation. And then the last type of operator-led schools, the transformation schools. These are all secondary schools with a unique theme and curriculum focused on college, career, or alternative programming like STEM, career exploration, fashion design, and they have more limited autonomies than our charter and our contract schools. They do have some autonomies, though, in relation to curriculum, academic focus, and enrollment as approved by the board. And this year we have 2 transformation schools in operation. They include Baltimore Design School, offering art, fashion, and graphic design programming, and REACH, offering certifications for careers in healthcare, construction, homeland security, HVAC, and the U.S. military. And it may be useful to note that some background on the transformation schools. They were initially designed under our former CEO, Andres Alonso, to combat high school dropout by running small focused community school programs that were increasing the caring adult to student relationships. And so while these pre-existing schools remain in the district's portfolio, they're no longer being created or open. So these 2 schools exist from that initiative. And tying the overview of these schools back to the purpose statement and the connections to strategic priority 6, there are some noteworthy benefits of having external operators as partners in the district's work. Some just brief examples, like Baltimore International Academy's program provides our students fluency in any of 5 languages upon the completion of their middle grades. And then BARD's program I mentioned offers our students an associate's degree upon graduating from high school. REACH's HVAC program is the only certification program of its kind in Baltimore City. And these are offerings that we as a district can't provide to all of our schools and all of our students without the partnership of these external operators. You can move ahead. Okay, so this map displays all of the district's operator-led schools based on their Community Conditions Index, which is a composite index comprised of 6 socioeconomic indicators used to categorize Baltimore City communities based on 3 areas of equity. So you can just kind of see where each of our schools by school type. Also, the charter schools are those green dots, contract schools are the red dots, and transformation schools are purple dots. And total enrollment for these schools, all 3 school types combined, is 15,675 of the 74,000 plus total K-12 student population district-wide. So they comprise a little over 21% of our K-12 student population. And when you factor in pre-K to 12, they're about 21, just a little under 21% of our total district student population. Pass it back to Angela.
And so now we want to kind of talk to you about our proposed revisions. And they fall into kind of 3 main buckets. One is to sort of just clarify language around the automatic waivers. Some of them relate to policies that have been updated, so we wanted to make sure that there was alignment with those new changes. The other bucket of these technical revisions you will see is just to make sure the sections are they flow more logically, that we're consistently using the same language like contract versus agreement within the policy, and just to again clarify where we didn't use precise language. So designating something as a priority and not a guaranteed placement, for example. And then lastly, which is the most important of these changes, is to codify just the policy standards for contract and transformation schools. And so we start these revisions with some proposed additional definitions. And so just defining what a contract school is, a transformation school, and an operator school. A lot of that I think you got from what Kim just shared. So I'm not gonna go through the definitions, but they're there. So these are our proposed additional definitions that we want to add to the policy. And then we're adding a section that focuses on non-charter operator-led schools. In particular, what it's reasserting, which is already codified in the contract themselves, as well as in our practices and governance, is that, you know, the contract with contract and transformation schools governs the requirements of their operation, that we enter as a district into these agreements to meet key strategic district needs where there is a need for unique expertise, like Kim highlighted earlier, and or to serve specific student populations, or to offer specialty programs that require unique enrollment considerations. In all of these, we need to make sure that these establishment of these schools and practices related to these schools are aligned with our policy ADA on equity. So that's another important thing for us to reassert in this policy. And then we identify what components of Ihbj and the reg cover contract and transformation schools, what applies and what doesn't apply within the policy. Some examples of the clarification. So the other kind of changes around clarifications is this example from the waiver clarification in section J.2a, where we added that, you know, if there's schools requesting a waiver to do something different, that it needs to come with the intended substitute policy, for example. And so you see enrollment in that section, we again using the word priority and not guaranteed placement. There is no guaranteed placement into charter schools, but there are a series of priorities and preferences. So just making sure that we're using the appropriate language versus, I think, outdated language that was in the existing policy. We're clarifying that when people apply to open a charter school or any of these schools, that within the deadline there is a window. And again, making sure that policy references are aligned to policy changes. So for example, the board, you just recently approved revisions to policy KCA, family and community engagement. And so the references in our prior policy needed to be updated to refer to the new sections of the new policy. From here, we're going to continue to do outreach to stakeholders, district office feedback sessions, operator and school leader feedback sessions as well. We present to our charter and operator-led schools advisory board on Thursday. We've already had like an initial conversation with them, so we're coming back for a more fuller conversation on the 21st. And then this goes to the board first reader for June 14th. Happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you all so much for the presentation. And I have, I think probably maybe sort of just comments and then thinking about just like sort of some of the context. So Angela, maybe you can just like help me understand a little bit, knowing that like, I'm thinking back to one of our last meetings where there was this constant back and forth between a charter and sort of, and also like sort of a disagreement about sort of the process. Like, could you talk to me about like how this, like the policy sort of like helps clarify this is in a way that, you know, by the time they come before a board around like a disagreement, that it doesn't actually like feel like they're like defending themselves or something has gone amiss. I just want to know, like, how are we using this strategically to sort of clarify in all the ways that we can, so that we don't get into those more contentious. I mean, I don't think we can completely get away from them, but like that they don't feel so contentious.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. You know, this revision was intended to be just sort of like a technical kind of revision. It's a very minor changes. We have, I think what you're referring to is like an appeal. We were the board's in an appeal process around a new school application. And what we have done in response to the state board's recommendations is to make sure, and you'll see that reflected because we have new school applications come to you soon, in a couple of weeks. You'll see that reflected in that process. So we did make a lot of, back when that happened, so we were a couple of years ago, we did make updates to the flow of the process. And so you'll see that noted in that timeline and how the process works. So like one of the things, just to give a specific example that we did was rather than, we used to have a process where the CEO's recommendation was shared sort of as the final step in the process, right? And what we've done now is move that up so it happens before the work session with the board, so people have a chance to respond on the record to what the recommendation is, and it can evolve based on, you know, additional information they provide or additional clarity or what comes out of the work session and the responses. So we've created more opportunities to cure in the process than existed in the past. And I will say, I think we were very responsible and listening to the state board's feedback and making those adjustments to the process.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Commissioner McFadden, did you have questions?
Thank you. I'm looking at the policy, the policy document and not the regulation. And I believe, yes, it's this one. And it's on page, give me 1 second.
Commissioner McFadden, can I ask another question or should I wait for you to? Okay. And so also was interested about like, and maybe I missed it in here about sort of the caps. I know that we just have a presentation about that. Like, is that captured in here around sort of like any more specific sort of context or explanation around like what schools can be asking for waivers on their student enrollment, sort of things like that? And because I remember one of our schools was asking, one of our charters was asking for an expansion, right? They wanted to sort of increase the size of their schools, and that happens quite a bit. And I'm curious that like, did I just kind of miss that section in sort of there, or if we could, or does it live somewhere else around like, where do we provide more clarity about who can, like under what conditions should you really get, you know, a waiver or increase in your student enrollment, for example?
There are not limitations on schools requesting waivers. And I think about, you know, in the policy, we define sort of what automatic waivers are. The thing that is unique about charter schools is that they can, with a few exceptions, ask for waivers about virtually anything. So it's a little bit hard to like name all the things because it's such an expansive thing. And so what governs that though is like, we have a really clear process for, you know, you have to have proof that there's a rationale, that you fully engage your community, that you have the, you're able to implement it, meaning you have the staffing, or you have the facility, or you have like the accompanying policy that addresses the heart of concerns, but you're doing it in a different way, right? That it has all those kind of components within it.
Awesome. Okay, so it's just because of the variability. It's like it's not from what I'm hearing from your perspective. You don't feel like it will be useful to be able to sort of try to like provide any sort of codify in the policy pieces of it, like any sort of detail about sort of that, because it's just so variable in terms of.
It is. I mean, we could look at, like, we do have like a clear process. There are certain things that we look at for every policy. So we could take a look at potentially putting that, you know, adding that to the policy, yeah, or maybe that's more appropriate in the reg. But yeah, we can look at if we can add some more meat there.
Great, thank you, Commissioner McFadden.
Thanks. It was page 18. Like I had the
reg. In the policy or the reg? Which one? In
the policy. Policy. Yeah, I appreciate, I mean, just saying, some of the edits, I hear what you're saying and the reason why you brought it, but the biggest, I think, addition was on, page 17, where it deals with those non-charter operator-led schools. With that, I'm on page 18, and it's so technical, right? So it's letter 5, Roman numeral 5, letter E, where it states on page 18, contract schools may have specialized admissions processes as necessary. I think the is a mistake, but as necessary to implement distinctive features of school programming with approval from the board. Can you provide some examples? Like for me, I kind of get it, but can you provide some examples of what that means if these schools are really designed for a targeted population and purpose? What would be some examples of specialized admissions processes for a contract school?
Right. So for example, our relationship with BART is not charter, it's contract, because for our early college program, there needed to be a way to assess a student's readiness to tackle both high school courses and 60 college credits at the same time. And so as part of their process, they do like an interview with students. We were very protective of not adding like another city, like another kind of school that has certain kinds of criteria. And that's a big part of what BART is about. Like it's really looking at, it may be students who on paper you may not say, oh, that is the student that's ready for early college, but like in interviewing them, they really are. Their grades may not have caught up to like what their readiness is, because it could be all sorts of things can play into that. And so they have an interview process and a writing component where they're looking to see, do you ask questions? Are you thoughtful? Those are the kinds of things that they look at in terms of their process. So that's an example. I had a lot of board discussion on approving that. So you guys had like robust feedback, and they've taken it seriously, and I think it's worked. We see that in the success that the school has had and the number of students who've earned both the high school diploma at really high grad rates as well as AA degrees from their program. So that's a concrete example. Or under charter law, you're open just generally. It's a lottery. You're open like kind of just citywide to everybody.
So I want to say Kim just told us that there were, how many contract schools do we have? I think she referenced 2. I think she referenced. So what makes BARD? So then BARD is, what is BARD then? Because
it's a contract school.
It's contract. So I thought she referenced design school and reach, but there's BARD.
They're a transformation school. So this is another reason why, but people have, lots of people, and I feel like if I didn't work in an O&I commission with that, I would have this confusion too. Many people have this confusion. That's a big reason why we wanted to like also define it in policy to sort of help to resolve that confusion.
Forgive the brain fog. You did say transformation, and so I get that, but that was helpful still with the contract schools, right? That admissions criteria that the board still has to approve, correct?
That's correct. Absolutely.
Okay. That's generally all I have with this particular policy, and the regs are really the same. It's supposed to be red line, but it's green line. I like the green instead of the red. Even though red is my favorite, the green just did something different to me today. But I appreciate it. That's all I had. And of course, thanks to the team for bringing this. If you hear the noise, it's my kids. It's cross country season, so they're not outside today. They're running the building like it's a track. So, forgive me.
Yeah, and so I guess my only other thought, and really is just a question for discussion, is if there are other places where you feel that sorry, and it's the regs, but I was looking at the timeline. I was like, oh, is 120 days enough? Like from your experience doing the work, do we need more time? Or like just trying to get a sense of like your sense of like, is there any more stuff that we probably should try to like expand now or to sort of adjust from your experience and your lessons learned that might want to live in this space?
Yeah, well, the 120 days is set in state law, so we don't have any wiggle room with that. That is state law, so we follow it. We comply with it, and then I think it's enough time.
Okay.
It's a tight process, but yeah, it's still I think a fair amount of time. No, I mean, like, I think we wanted to kind of just really be focused and technical. Like, we just did a major update when the law changed, right, in 1718. And I think we're always in this kind of changing context. I think we want to pause and kind of understand where we are and just do a minor update right now. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for the work. And I know the process is lengthy and time consuming, so I appreciate all that y'all do and do it so well. And so thank you and the whole team who support this forward. So appreciate you.
Thank you.
For sure. And so in the time that we have left, we have space to talk about 2 regulations that, compliance reports. One around physical education, and we'll start there. And I just mostly have questions about on it. So it's Compliance Report 3.01 IHCAB, Access to an Appropriate Physical Education Program. And I guess my only question was, I'm hearing former Commissioner Hassan and thinking about like the additional supports that our students need in terms of physical education, and a number of our students who are learning differently. I'm just curious, like, do we feel like we have enough resources and space in order to provide? I saw the numbers of like teachers who were kind of moving around and like, you know, who could do this. Yeah, and I'm just curious about that. Like, do we need more, or from your read of the space, do we feel like we have capacity to meet the current needs?
So good afternoon, Dr. Brooks, Executive Director of Special Education. And so the answer to that is yes. We currently have 98 students that are receiving adaptive PE. 33 of those students receive it inside the general ed setting. So that's inside the physical education classroom with their typical peers. 65 of those students outside. So they receive that outside of that general ed setting, outside of that physical ed classroom, general ed physical ed classroom, and then 66 on a consult. So that adapted PE teacher is working with the general ed physical education teacher to provide those additional supports that way. The goal, and as you read the report, the goal is to have more inclusive opportunities for our students and to provide that those opportunities for those students to be with their typical peers at the greatest amount of time, and to really provide those physical ed teachers the strategies and the skills to be able to work with all students. And so really our adapted PE teachers work very closely with those physical ed, general physical education teachers. There's a lot of professional development that takes place with both the adapted PE teachers as well as the general physical education teachers, so that all of our students are providing and offered that continuum of learning in their least restrictive environment. So I know that was a long way of saying yes, but I wanted to provide some context around my yes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's all helpful because I had not really conceptualized the differences that might need to be taking place. So I appreciate all of that. Commissioner McFadden, did you have any questions or thoughts that you wanted to offer?
Thank you, and hello, Dr. Deborah Brooks. It's good to see you, and I think is it Gilbert, Mr. Gilbert?
Yeah, Liam Gilbert. I'm the Educational Associate for Adapted Physical Education.
I heard you and Commissioner Brooks reminiscing on a few moments ago. I don't really have questions. I know that this really focuses on students, you know, servicing our students who, you know, have a diverse learning, have diverse learning needs. My question really is, because I didn't see it in here and it may be for someone else, but do we have schools, because this did mention schools, at least all of our K-8 schools have at least one physical education teacher there, correct? Where students are potentially offered, I think, like at least 45 minutes a week. Are there schools that have more than just one physical education teacher? Perhaps in the K-8 setting, but certainly in the 9 through 12 setting, in the high school setting. It's just a question that I thought about when I saw that at least one, because it also takes me to where we are as far as fine arts teachers in several content areas, but it just makes me think about, as I heard Commissioner Brooks mentioning resources and capacity to make sure that our young people are honestly offered, right, the education that we know they deserve. Are we actually able to do that with bodies physically in building spaces? So that was a question. I know it's not directly related to the compliance report, but it was something that I thought about. And then what is the correlation in this regard with physical education and then health education? Are these physical education teachers that are doing the adaptive phys ed, are they also servicing our students as it relates to health? Or are there different educators that are satisfying that requirement for our students as far as, you know, being outside of the special ed setting to receive those services? I'm just curious.
So I'll answer the first part and then I'll let Liam answer the second part to the question. So for the first part of the question, we work very closely with our teaching and learning partners who actually work with the schools around staffing. And so I do what I do know, and then I can also work and have Mr. Etienne be able to provide some additional context. But I do know that many of our high schools may have additional physical education teachers based upon the number of students that are in their schools and the staffing needs that are in their schools, to ensure that all students have access to physical education and those additional supports within their schools. So I do know that, but I will have Mr. Etienne be able to give you the exact numbers, because I can't speak to those exact numbers outside of the students that are receiving specially designed instruction. Mr. Gilbert, if you want to talk a little bit about our students that receive adapted PE, and then how they also get the additional support around health education as well.
Well, our students who receive adapted PE, they're serviced by our adapted PE and physical education teachers, and the health component is covered underneath physical education, but as adapted PE teachers, we aren't specifically servicing health. There is a curriculum being written, like a special education curriculum being written by the teaching and learning committee to put in. But as far as the physical education part, that's where we focus. The health education is a separate entity. There are physical education teachers in this city, such as myself, who are certified to teach health, but that's a staffing issue with the principals. But as far as what my adapted PE student or teachers are doing, they're focusing on the physical education part, and the health part is something else that happens in their schools.
Right. So the physical education teacher, the general physical education teacher, will provide the health component to be able to support the students just like their typical peers. Mm-hmm. So for those typical peers that are receiving health, they will receive the health with their typical peers, but the adaptive PE that's identified on their IEP, that is provided by the adaptive PE teacher.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Yep, that was all I had with this. Thank you.
Great. And so I'm curious about the training and the professional development that general education teachers receive in order for them to support the students. Like, do they receive I just love to hear, is there a particular training hours that they have to hit? Do they receive a certification, and just general thoughts on sort of receptivity to this, or just out of personal curiosity for that matter?
Yep. So throughout the year, there's collaborative professional development that takes place with both the adapted PE teacher and the general physical education teacher together. We kind of outlined those in the report. So there's a fall session in October, there's another session in January, another session in February, where we talk about the different components of supporting students with disabilities, the characteristics of the disabilities, because not all students with disabilities receive adapted PE. So just also providing those different strategies and working with our diverse learners. And then for those students who do have adapted PE and they may have a consult model, the two teachers would work together. So let's say I have adapted PE consult. The adapted PE teacher will work with my physical education teacher to say, this is how you can support Deborah in that general ed setting, how you can support her on when she's receiving physical education. These may be the adapted equipment that she would use depending upon the unit that you're teaching during your physical education class.
Okay, so it's not like a certification, but more of sort of targeted, collaborative initiative.
Yeah, support. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you. That's all I have. I appreciate it and all the work that you're doing. And Mr. Gilbert, it's really good to see you after 10th.
It's great to see you, Commissioner Brooks.
It's been a long time.
It's only been about 23 years.
I know. But yeah, I appreciate all the work, and you were a great PE teacher, and even though I was a terrible PE student.
you did just fine.
You passed,
so you did all right.
Thank you, and it's good to see you, Dr.
But again, it was nice to meet you, Commissioner McFadden. Nice to see everybody.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Great. And so for our final sort of item of 3.02 IKEA promotion and retention and grades K through 12.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Good. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Were you still introducing?
I was just going to read it off, but I'm ready. Yeah. So I was.
Dr. Fife, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
Good. Yes. I'm sure a lot of folks know, but I mean, you had a little one. You just had a baby, so we're grateful that you're back. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Commissioner Brooks, were you opening it up, or you were just?
Oh yeah, I was just reading it. But yeah, so we're opening for questions that we had about sort of the compliance report. I just have some thoughts on this one, but
Sure. If I may, actually, before questions,
Okay.
just provide a little additional context for you. So in some internal discussions and kind of revisions that are happening for us as we pull these reports together and get the data, we actually have additional data that we will be sending to the board that will allow you to see more subgroup information. We weren't able to get that to you in time for this particular meeting, but it's coming, and wanted to let you know that it's coming. That will allow you to see by race and ethnicity, by students with disabilities, and by English learners. And it will meet all of our district data suppression rules that kind of protect the privacy as needed based on numbers of students, but will give you additional insight into what's happening with our students.
Great, because those are my questions.
I thought they might be, and we recognize that they likely would be, and apologies that it just took us a little bit longer to get that data to you. We wanted to submit some, the substantive grade by grade so that we had it by the deadline, but we did want to do a deeper dive both for ourselves and for you.
Great, thank you. And so I had sort of two thoughts in mind. So I was curious about sort of like, I know the ways in which we have it broken down. If I could also, like, if we could also see it by, the demographics that I had down here were for, I think in other places we've seen it's for English language learners. I'm not sure if you mentioned that.
Yes, we'll have that.
Great. And then also for, I know that we have students who also experience homelessness. And I know that they sometimes struggle with sort of attendance. So it would be nice to be able to see sort of how they fit into this equation too. And I think we already seen the numbers from another presentation, so maybe it's already in existence and just kind of putting it together in a way that we can see it there. And I think a part of what sort of some of the other compliance reports that we've talked about is also thinking about, okay, so this is the data, these are the subgroups that are actually, and how they're faring and how they're moving through, and then to highlight any sort of strategies around intervention that we're currently using, so that we can have a discussion about sort of like what does this mean, and then also around effectiveness. Is it really working, the things that we're doing, or do we need to increase this this service or this intervention in order to see a different result, for example?
Sounds good. Thank you. I will take that back.
Commissioner McFadden, did you have any thoughts?
So I know a lot of that most likely will come from teaching and learning in the academics team, right? In collaboration with that. I appreciate that. A lot of what you referenced in the beginning of your comments, Dr. Pfeiffer, were similar to what, I was going to ask a little bit more, to have the data a bit more disaggregated so that we can see some more specifics. What I will say, right, we saw like this progress in promotion rates over the past several years, and then the pandemic hit, right? So I certainly do know that that is a challenge, not just for us, but for school systems across the country. And just even thinking about the work that we do with the Council of Great City Schools, we're all seeing this type of trend. Going back though to Dr. Brooks's, Commissioner Brooks's point, it would be nice as we continue to move forward to really just see how the recovery work is impacting, how the students are being promoted. Because K through 8, we saw it, that's fine. 9th grade is where we saw that boop, 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 right? Where like there's some challenges there. So are we getting under those challenges as it relates to trends in data, anecdotal information that we have that can really get to the root and the core of that so that we can really catch those challenges earlier and really grow the capacity of our young people and, quite frankly, their families, right? And supporting them through their high school journey. That's what we're seeing the most challenge. Perhaps we may need to look at middle school articulation as well in preparing, because I know one thing that you've mentioned before are those multi-year plans.
Right.
Prior to us thinking about recovery work, right? You all have been presenting to us on these multi-year plans that are introduced at the middle grades. And so what does that look like, right? What does that process look like? What information are we taking from that? Have we paused that to really do the student learning plan process? Are we doing both at the same time? Do we need to do both at the same time? Like where are we with it so that when we get to seeing, ninth grade promotion data, and it's more than data, right? It translates into real life. We want to make sure that our kids are actually ready to be prepared for life and career and college. So that's where I'm thinking, especially as we're looking at calendar development, because we're in that process right now, looking at the board's calendar and how the system is going to drive its work in the coming year and the year after. How are we using this to support that type of work? I'm really concerned, and I keep saying it, and other commissioners do as well, about the work that is happening in the middle grades. That really supports high school work, but it's a pivotal time in a child's cognitive development. And we have several K-8 schools. It's just, I'm concerned about how we are focusing on the middle grades to really make sure that our young people are actually prepared. I think about Algebra 1, right? Like, and statistically, we know the importance of, Algebra 1. And I've mentioned this before, even with, options with what we've learned and gleaned from as far as virtual learning is concerned, right? So maybe some schools may not have the capacity to offer it per se in their brick and mortar, but how flexible and innovative are we now becoming to offer certain courses that may not be offered at specific schools to kind of help in the middle grades to really ensure that our young people are on the best trajectory possible to be life, career, and college ready. So those are really thoughts. It's not necessarily, a question, but looking at ninth grade rates based on the data that we were presented in this compliance report, it's glaring. Not that the others aren't as important, but just a fresh, brief look, right? That ninth grade year, it's like we're fine up until 8th grade, and then boom, ninth grade hits. And so I know that there's a lot of work happening in city schools with focusing on, high school, but also the middle grades, I feel like, just me honestly and personally, are a bit neglected as it relates to all of the other grade bands that we're focusing on.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate those comments. I was quickly jotting down notes, and we'll certainly take all this back. I'm thinking that as we discuss with Dr. Dabrowski, we can think about how we integrate this in our recovery updates as well, to make sure that we're pulling in this data along with the strategies, and so you're seeing that all together in a clear way. So thank you so much for those thoughts and comments and questions.
I appreciate that, Dr. Pfeiffer, and I'm not saying that just based on what we see here, right? Like ninth grade, I think needs to be, I guess I'll say highlighted a bit more. The middle grades and the ninth grade, right? Highlighted a bit more as we're receiving, to your point, those recovery updates. And just because clearly we're looking at the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic when we see the data, right? So how do we directly, and I know that the work is happening to align everything, but just how do we highlight the middle grades and ninth grade? Because for us as board commissioners, it can help us in the way that resources are then allocated to target and support best, where we see the greatest challenge and the greatest need. So that's all.
Absolutely. I know that Mavis Jackson would be thrilled to talk about the on track to graduate work in the 9th grade that actually aligns with what the Kerwin requirements are now. We were ahead of the game in kind of developing that. Taking notes on what you've said on middle school, we have a lot of kind of burgeoning work happening there, but we'll make sure that we highlight those specifically. Middle school and 9th grade, I hear you loud and clear.
Thanks, Dr. Pfeiffer.
Absolutely. Yep, and I think sort of I just had two thoughts. One was to what degree possible, and I'm not sure if we've sort of even instituted our system of sort of collecting data on our LGBT students yet, and understanding sort of like where they fall at. So I don't know if we have it yet, but yeah, I think it would be important to know as a subgroup. And I think sort of the subgroup work feels really, really important. And I know we always pull that data because I think sort of the more we get to understand the social context in which those particular groups are operating, then we can really develop, I think, more creative interventions. And I think sort of what I'm interested in at this point is thinking about how do we sort of account for, as Commissioner McFadden was talking about, the pandemic. So I think what I would what would give me pause if the same recommendations that we saw pre-pandemic were then sort of used either in the same way or without any degree of increase to sort of address sort of this. For me, that would be like, well, are we really committed to sort of addressing this particular dynamic that might be showing up in our data, and those data points are our students. And so I would hope that that in sort of the strategies that we're outlining, that there would be some level of differentiation to address the dosage, a more dose response to sort of with the pandemic being in mind. So those were probably the last two things that I had. That sounds good. Looking forward to sharing more about what we're doing and how the data we have has influenced that. Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pfeiffer. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you too. And so just want to check, I think we might be sort of at our time point. Commissioner McFadden, did you have anything else you wanted to add or say? Because we got through our few compliance reports.
I appreciate the ask, Commissioner Brooks. I do want to just take a moment to, because we have her on, Tanisha Moore in our board office. She celebrated a birthday a couple of weeks ago, and I don't believe we actually met. And then, of course, we were on spring break. So, Tanisha, happy birthday, belated to you. I hope that you enjoyed it.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I was able to enjoy my birthday. I went away. So thank you so much.
No problem, and it's good to see. I see our chief of staff who popped in also. So, Allison, I hope you're well. And yep, just saying. And it looks like you're in your office.
Absolutely. And my internet is breaking up, so I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes, it's good to see you all and be part of this. So thanks for being here and as always, all your attention to all these important issues. So thanks.
Absolutely. I'm not taking up any more time, Commissioner Brooks, because I don't want to lose you before you end the meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just had to drop off the camera because my internet was acting wonky. So again, thank you everybody for joining our meeting today. Just wanted to remind the public that this is an open space and we invite you and encourage you to come and participate and sort of provide open comment as into sort of our policies and our compliance reports. Our next meeting is May 17th, same time. Will be a virtual meeting and we'll be talking about GBCA compensation as well as ECAE, school police and general order review. If individuals want to sign up for public comment, you can do so beginning at 9 a.m. on the Thursday before our meeting up until the 5 o'clock p.m. The Monday before our meeting date. Please contact our board office at 443-984-2000, or you can sort of email us. With that, I would say thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you at our next policy meeting, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye-bye.